Chapter 19. Lost and Found. The way to Race Point was along a road so narrow and hidden between two hills of sand it could easily be overlooked. Carrie explained that at Kenneth Child's request, no sign was to be posted to designate the road. He was the only one who lived on it, and it had become known as Child's Road. After its entrance, protected by two hills, the road was covered with sand that was 6 to 8 inches deep in spots. The best way to navigate this is to let the air out of my tires, Carrie explained, and stop the truck to do just that. It was late in the afternoon. The powder blue sky was streaked with flat, soft white clouds that looked like vanilla icing smeared across in odd shapes. Carrie said it meant it was very windy in the upper atmosphere. We went about 3/4 of a mile before we reached the peak of the incline where we were able to see the ocean. It looked a darker metallic blue, making its white caps whiter. The beach here was cluttered with twisted seaweed that lay in clumps. Combed by fingers of waves. Terns walked gingerly around and through the seaweed as if they were part of some bird ballet entitled Searching for Food. This is one of the best places to find driftwood, Carrie said. Laura and I spent hours gathering strangely shaped pieces. Local artists will buy them from you. Seashells too, he added. Where's Kenneth's home? Just to the right here, he explained as we went and made a turn. Ahead was a smoke gray cedar saltbox house. The sea air, sun, and rain had faded its black shutters to a light charcoal. Behind the house was another small structure that looked like a barn. That's his studio, Carrie explained. I saw no one. The front of the house was spotted with pink, wild beach grass. No flowers, no trees. On the side of the house facing us was an upside-down rowboat, its hull sun-bleached. There was a dark blue Jeep in what served as a driveway. An inky black Labrador was lying on the rear seat and lifted its head with curiosity when we approached. That's his dog, Ulysses. He's 15 years old, half blind and deaf, Carrie said. At least that's what the judge says. His Jeep's here, so Kenneth must be home, Carrie muttered with some anxiety. From the moment we left the house, a small but persistent trembling vibrated through every bone and muscle in my body. My heart was a continual drumbeat. Carrie tried to keep some conversation, but I could only smile or nod. You sure you want to do this? He asked one final time before turning into the driveway. I nodded and took a deep breath. Ulysses rose to his legs, as if he had to lift 3 times his weight. But once he was on his feet, he hopped out of the Jeep and began barking. It was a friendly bark, not a growl. Whenever Laura and I stopped by here, we had a feeling we were being watched. But Kenneth didn't come out but 2 times, and then it was just a quick hello and some comment about the weather. I'm gonna do this, I said firmly. I opened the truck door and stepped out. Ulysses came to me first, his tail wagging. Hello, I said and patted him. The sight of company excited him, and he was licking my hand and rushing back and forth between Carrie and me for our strokes and words. Some watchdog, huh? Carrie said with a laugh. I looked at the front door. It was gray and weather-beaten, with no knocker, no buzzer, no indication the inhabitant of this house wanted anyone coming into it. You wouldn't think he had money the way he lives, Carrie muttered. That Jeep's about 10 or 12 years old, and the furniture in the house looks as if he got it all at a thrift shop. We were never inside, he said quickly. But Laura and I once peeked through the window. There aren't even pictures on the walls. All his art is in his studio, I guess. We never got close to looking there. Kenneth has eyes that can scare you. What do you mean? You'll see, he said. I think he might not answer the door. We stared at it. I could see Carrie wasn't going to be the one to knock, so I stepped forward slowly over the walkway, which consisted of small rocks. Ulysses stayed at my side. Carrie remained a foot or so behind. I knocked and waited. The roar of the ocean and waves breaking at the beach, the cry of terns and the whistle of the sea breeze was all that we heard. I knocked again, louder. What do you want? Both of us nearly jumped out of our sneakers. We turned to see Kenneth Childs standing at the corner of the house. He wore a pair of jeans, no shoes or socks, and a faded brown t-shirt. He was long-legged and slim. His hair, a little darker than mine, was, as Carrie described, tied in a ponytail at the end which reached the base of his neck. His full face had a beard, was even a little darker. He had a wide forehead with deep-set dark eyes and had a long, straight nose under which his strong, firm lips stretched to dip at the corners. I couldn't help staring at his face, looking for more evidence of my own, but it was hard because of that thick beard. To me, it was like a mask. She wanted to come see you, Carrie said quickly, embarrassed and made more nervous by the long silence. What for? Kenneth asked, his eyes on me. My mother told me to say hello, I said. Who's your mother? He asked without softening his face. He was miles from smiling. Haley, I said, Haley Logan. He stared for a moment longer, and then he drew closer. Ulysses went to his side immediately. You're Haley's daughter? Yes. Haley sent you? He asked with skepticism. I nodded, positive that he could see through my fabrication. Why didn't she come herself? He asked me. She's not here. I'm here living with my uncle and aunt, I explained, and tried to swallow so my words wouldn't sound so tiny. I couldn't take my eyes off him. His eyes were so hard, as if made of stone. This is what Carrie meant, I thought. What's your name? He asked. Melanie. His lips softened a bit. He looked at Carrie and then he looked at me. I'm going to school here now, I said, too nervous to permit any long silences. For a while. Where's your mother then? She's in California, I said. She's auditioning to become an actress or a model. His face finally relaxed. That figures, he said. He looked as if he was going to turn and walk away. I met your father at my grandmother and grandfather's house, I said quickly. He raised his eyebrows. And what did he say when he found out who you were? He asked. He was nice, I replied, not sure what he meant. Dad's the most charming man on Cape, Kenneth said, as if he were a basic fact everyone knew. He looked at Carrie. You're Jacob's boy. Yes, sir. Sorry about your sister. I don't get to hear much news out here, but I heard about that. Carrie nodded, biting down his lower lip, his eyes glassy. Kenneth turned back to me. Are you a good student? Yes, sir. Your father here too? He asked, his face firm again. No, sir. My father died in a coal mining accident a few months ago. Really? He looked at Carrie and then at me. Coal mine? Where were you living? West Virginia, a town called Sewell. He nodded. Yeah, I knew they'd gone south. His eyes were full of thoughts for a moment, then he blinked and looked at me more sharply. You look a lot like her, he said. I guess she's still pretty if she was going to go be a model or actress. She is, I said. Well, he said, starting to turn, thanks for stopping by. Can I see some of your work? I blurted. Carrie's eyes widened. He looked at me and then at Kenneth, who stopped turning and considered. Why? He asked, his eyes small and suspicious. I've heard a lot about it, I said. You know anything about art? A little, what I learned in school. An artist's work is very personal, until the day he puts it up for sale in some gallery, he said. I know. You know? He widened his smile. Are you an artist? I play the fiddle and sing, I said. I don't like doing it in front of people until I'm sure I'm ready. I guess an artist doesn't like showing his work until he's confident. His eyebrows lifted again. That's right. He thought for a moment. Okay, I'll show you something I've nearly completed, he said. Maybe I need a completely fresh pair of eyes looking at it. I'll let you look at it if you promise to be honest about what you think. I don't like to lie about my feelings, I said, my eyes now as firm as his. I bet you don't. Follow me. He started around the house, and Carrie looked at me as if he'd seen a ghost, shocked, surprised, still afraid. You can bring him along, Kenneth added without turning back to us. Between the house and the studio was a patch of beach grass, a bench, and a small man-made pond in which minnows burst into frenzy, swimming around the shadows that touched the water. Kenneth opened his studio door and paused. Don't touch any of my tools, he warned. I nodded, and so did Carrie. The studio was just a large room. On one side were tables and a kiln. On the other tables were his tools and materials. There was a beaten-up tweed settee to our immediate left, with a driftwood table in front of it, on which was a large coffee mug and a plate with a half-eaten muffin on it. Kenneth's work in progress was to our right. It was a figure about 5 feet high of a woman whose arms were changing into wings just above the elbow. The face was interesting. Her eyes turned upward and her mouth was open as if to express a great sigh. She was naked, and it looked as if the feathers were growing along her back, sides, and stomach. Well, Kenneth said, what do you think I'm trying to show? Someone turning into an angel, I said. He smiled warmly. Exactly. I'm calling it Angel in Progress. I have a lot of detailed work left to do yet. It's very interesting, especially the look on her face, I said. It's as if she's... What? He drew closer to me. Seeing heaven for the first time. Yes, he said, gazing at her, she is. Do you always work in clay? I asked. No, I've done stone, metal, and wood, but here I'm trying to capture and record the feeling, the fleeting impression, much the way a painter does in a quick sketch. After I'm finished, I'll cast this in bronze. How do you do that? I asked. He checked my expression to see if I really wanted to know. Satisfied, he gestured toward his tools in his kiln. In 2 stages. First, a negative mold is formed, then a positive cast is made from a negative impression. Plaster is used for the negative mold and bronze for the positive. I call that slave work, since all artistic work is complicated. You do all that by yourself? Yes, he said with a short laugh. So, he said, his eyes small again, what do you know about sculpture? Just what I learned in history about the Greek gods and athletes that were their favorite subjects, I recited. I remember our teacher passed around a picture of the 3 goddesses. He raised his eyebrows. That's right. My best friend's parents have a small replica of Michelangelo's David in their house, I said. But I've never been to a museum and the only galleries I've seen are the ones in the street here. Take her to Gordon's on Commercial, Kenneth told Carrie. You know where it is? Carrie nodded quickly. I have some pieces there. I'd like to see them. He nodded. Well, you've restored my faith in the educational system. Have you ever tried to do anything with art, draw, or paint? No. Maybe you should, he said. Was he telling me I had inherited some of his talent? I glanced at Carrie, who still looked timid and nervous. His eyes shifted from side to side as to look for escape routes. School's almost over for you, isn't it? Kenneth asked. Yes, just a little more review, finals, and that's it for this year. I graduate next year. Carrie graduates this year. Kenneth looked at him. What are you going to do with yourself? He asked him. What do I do now? Fishing, cranberry harvest? Kenneth nodded. And you, what do you want to become? He asked me. I think a teacher, I said. Not an actress or a model like your mother? I don't think so, I said. He looked pleased. You were very friendly with my mother once, weren't you? Yes, he said. He gazed at his work in progress. And with your father, and with Carrie's father. We all grew up together. Carrie and I looked at each other. In his eyes, I could see tension. Was I just going to come out and ask him if he could be my father? Well, I gotta get back to work, he said. He walked toward the door to indicate that he wanted us to leave. I gazed again at Carrie and then followed Kenneth. Carrie followed me. Ulysses waited at the door. I like your dog. He's old but faithful. I'm afraid he doesn't get enough exercise either. Maybe I can walk him for you sometimes, I offered. I'd like to hunt for seashells on the beach here. He nodded. What are you going to do this summer? He asked. I don't know. I'm waiting for my mother to come back or call me. Well, tell her hello when she calls you. He stepped back into the studio and closed the door. I looked at Carrie. I didn't know what to say or ask anything. I explained. It's all right. Let's go. I don't think he would have admitted anything anyway. Maybe he doesn't even know himself. We started back to the truck, Ulysses following us. I should have said something more, asked him something specific, I moaned. Next time. Did you get any sort of feeling about him? Carrie asked as we backed out of the driveway and started towards the road. I think so, I said. It's hard and it's not fair, I cried. Mommy has to tell me the truth. She must, I said firmly. There's no reason for her not to now. We bumped along the sandy road, and when I looked back, I saw Ulysses turn and trot back toward the Jeep. He looked disappointed. After Carrie stopped at the garage to refill his tires with air, we headed home. We had just made a turn toward the house when we both saw the police car parked right behind Uncle Jacob's. What's this all about? Carrie wondered aloud. We pulled up beside the police car and got out slowly. Both of us noticed that the front door was still open, and we glanced at each other and hurried inside. There were two policemen standing in the hallway, the taller one with his hat in his hands. Uncle Jacob was talking to them softly. They turned as we stepped in, Uncle Jacob's face darker and firmer than I'd ever seen it. We heard soft sobbing coming from the living room to see that Aunt Sarah was seated on the settee and May beside her stroking her arm. What happened? Carrie asked. There's been an accident, Uncle Jacob said. Who? Carrie asked. Uncle Jacob looked at the two policemen, and when he turned back, his eyes were on me. My heart stopped and started. Mommy, I cried. He nodded. What happened? Officer Baker came to tell us that they received a call from a police in... Where was it? Pomona, sir, the taller policeman said. It's near Los Angeles, he explained. What happened? Is she all right? My heart stopped. Tell her what you know, Uncle Jacob said to the policeman. The officer turned to me. There was an accident on the freeway out there. Single car caught on fire. The gentleman driving the car was thrown from the vehicle, but my mother? Apparently she was trapped in the car. The man survived and is in the hospital. His name is, he checked the notepad, Richard Marlin. He claims the woman who died in the car was Haley Ann Logan, and told the police to call here. The car exploded, and there wasn't much anyone could do. Mommy's dead. The policeman looked at Uncle Jacob. Aunt Sarah started to cry louder. Carrie reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Tell me," I screamed. I had to have them say it. "That's what we're saying," Uncle Jacob started. I shook my head. She was having auditions. She was calling me. The policeman turned to Uncle Jacob. "They want to know if you want the remains shipped here," he said. "Call Olivia," Aunt Sarah cried. "I will want that," Uncle Jacob replied. "Stop it," I screamed. "Stop all these lies." I put my hands over my ears and shook my head. "Easy now," Uncle Jacob said, holding out his hand. You're lying. Everyone just spins one lie after another." I looked at Carrie. He shook his head. "Melanie," he said softly. "It's not true," I begged him. I turned and ran out of the house. "Jacob," Aunt Sarah screamed. I nearly tripped over the steps, but I recovered my balance and went around the corner of the house. I ran as hard and as fast as I could. I needed to get away from them, away from the story, away from the policeman's eyes. When I reached the sand, I slipped and fell, catching myself with my hands, and then shooting up and running harder, with the tears flying off my cheeks. My lungs were screaming, but I wouldn't stop. I ran up the hill and fell again, this time lying there, sobbing. Mommy wasn't going to call me. She wasn't going to send for me or return. I cried until my ribs ached, and then I stared out at the cranberry bog. I never heard Carrie coming, but he was suddenly at my side. "Mom's worried about you," he said, and squatted. He put a blade of beach grass in his mouth. I gazed ahead, not hearing, not seeing, not feeling. The police said they were going very fast and probably lost control. They rammed into a pole and the car turned over, spilling your mother's friend onto the road. Her door didn't open and the car rolled over and over and then just went up in flames. Nobody's lying. I turned from him. Mommy had done a selfish thing by leaving me here and by keeping secrets, but I could never harden my heart against her enough to stop loving her. There were good times to remember, lots of soft moments. Sometimes I would catch her looking at me with a gentle smile on her lips, and I could almost hear what she was thinking, how pleased she was with me. She had come to depend on me so much. If only I had been with them, I thought, I would have made them slow down. "They're going to bring her back and put her in the Logan section of the cemetery," Carrie said. I spun on him, my eyes on fire. When she was alive, they didn't want her within 10 feet from him, but now that she's dead, they'll put her on the ground near them? He had no answer. He looked down. "She should be sent back to Sewell and buried beside my father," I said. "It's where she belongs." Carrie shrugged. "Tell Grandma." I thought a moment. "I will. Take me there right now." "Right now?" I stood up and so did he. "Right now," I said, and started down the hill. I was running on anger and disappointment. He caught up. "I'll just go tell Dad," he said when we reached the house. "Just drive us there, Carrie. Don't go ask for permission for every breath you take." He looked at me, then nodded. "Okay, let's go." We got into the truck and he backed out of the driveway. As we pulled away from the house, I saw Uncle Jacob stop and look after us. The moment we drove up Grandma Olivia's and Grandpa Samuel's driveway, I opened the door. Carrie hadn't even brought the truck to a stop. He hit the brakes and I was out, rushing toward the front door. Carrie slammed his door and followed. I pushed the buzzer and waited for a second, and then pushed it again. Grandpa opened the door, his face somber. "Melanie," he said, surprise overcoming his sadness quickly. "Where's Grandma Olivia?" I demanded. There was no sense in talking to him, I thought quickly. She makes all the decisions in this family. I rushed past them. "Just what's going on here?" she demanded, and she was standing in the sitting room doorway. "You heard about my mother. Your niece I fired?" She stiffened. "Jacob just called." "What a terrible thing," Grandpa said, coming up beside me. "I don't want her buried here. I want her buried back in Sewell beside my daddy," I said. "It's where she belongs." "Sewell?" Grandma looked at Grandpa and then at Carrie. "She's my sister's daughter. She doesn't belong there. She belongs here." "Where she hasn't been welcomed for years and years?" I spit back at her. "How can you be such a hypocrite?" Grandma Olivia's face lost whatever color it had and became pale, mean, moon, and bent on destruction. "I'm no hypocrite. I have never said one thing and done another. I have never lied, and I've always been a woman who keeps her word and her promises. Your mother was my sister's child and belongs in our ground near my father's and mother's graves. She doesn't belong in some strange place beside a man who married her for all the wrong reasons." "That man is your son," I reminded her. "Was my son," she reminded me. "I will not lay out money to send her remains there. She should be with her family." "Why couldn't you feel that way when she was alive?" "You know the answer to that question," she said. "You're overwrought, emotionally disturbed. All of us have been taken by surprise. None of us wanted to see such a tragedy, but it's happened. It began some time ago and has finally been brought to this horrible end. The least we could do for Haley's poor soul is put her remains where she has some familial company. You're too overwhelmed to discuss the matter." She turned away. "I'll dig her up and bring her back to Sewell. Someday I will, I swear. When I'm dead and gone, you can do whatever you want. But I would hope that by then you would have grown up," she replied. "I'm sorry for your sorrow. Losing a mother is never easy, no matter how your mother has treated you. But we must go on and do what's right, the things that are good. Carrie, see that she gets home." She left us. I stood there for a few moments. "She's right, my dear." Grandpa put his arm around me. "She usually is. She's a remarkable woman." "She's an ogre," I said. "The only thing that's remarkable is how you all let her get away with bullying you." I pulled away from him and marched out of the house. Carrie followed and we got back in the truck. "There's nothing we can do," he said. "We have no money, no authority." "I know, let's go home." I lowered my head. The house was deadly quiet upon our return. I went directly to my room and lay there thinking, remembering and crying, and built up my tears again. May came to my door to sign her regrets. I thanked her, but I didn't want to be consoled, even by her. I was still quite bitter and angry. Later, Aunt Sarah sent May up with a tray of food. I couldn't eat anything, but I let her stay with me and tried to explain and describe Mommy to her when she asked me to tell her about her. Signing the thoughts, checking the book to be sure I was making the right gestures, made me think more about the incidents and descriptions. For a moment, it occupied my mind, and my sorrow lifted a bit. I was exhausted and fell asleep early, curled up on the bed, still in my clothes. Aunt Sarah stopped by to put a blanket over me. Late in the night, I heard my door open softly and looked through the cloudy eyes to see Carrie tiptoe in. He stood by the bed, gazing at me for a few moments. Then he knelt down to kiss my cheek, and I pretended to be dead asleep. Morning light brought the moment of disbelief, a moment of hope. Perhaps it had all been a nightmare after all. But here I was waking up in my clothes. Reality would not be held back. I got undressed, showered, and changed. By the time I went downstairs, Carrie and May had gone to school. The house was quiet. Even Aunt Sarah was gone. I made myself some coffee and toast and sat on the porch. After a half hour, I saw Aunt Sarah coming down the street. She was nicely dressed. "Good morning. Have you had anything to eat?" "Yes, Aunt Sarah. I was just at church praying for Haley." "Thank you," I said. I felt guilty not getting up and going with her. "You can go with me tomorrow if you like. It's a horrible tragedy," she continued, "but I want you to know that you have a home here forever. We love you." "Thank you, Aunt Sarah." "I stopped at Laura's grave on the way home," she said with a sigh, and told her the sad news. She was such a crutch for me whenever there was bad news. Laura had a way of filling me with hope. Her smile, her loving, gentle smile. "You should go to her grave and pray. You'll be comforted." "Maybe I will," I said. That pleased her. "Come in whenever you want. Talk whenever you want," she said. I nodded and she went in the house. I was on the porch when Carrie and May returned from school. May started running the moment she spotted me. We hugged and she sang the stories of her day, showing me a paper with stars all over it. When she went to change, Carrie sat on the steps and told me about school, how everyone had heard the news. "All your teachers send regards and told me to tell you not to worry about the exams. They'll provide you makeups." "I'll take my exams on time," I said. "I don't need to make extra work for them." "Are you sure?" "Yes." He thought a moment and then smiled. "I was really surprised about how many kids came over to ask me about you this afternoon. Once the news spread, you became more popular than you think. I bet you could run for senior class president and get elected instead of that blowfish Betty Hargate." "Somehow that doesn't seem too important right now." "Yeah, I know." After a moment, he said, "My father says the funeral will be Saturday. Your mother will be back here by then." I turned away and got up. "Where are you going?" he asked, concerned. "Just to walk on the beach." "Want company?" "Not right now," I said. I threw him a smile and walked away. It seemed as if the terns were following me, circling overhead. Against the horizon, I saw a cargo ship heading south. The ship was calming the tide with more gentleness than I'd ever seen. I walked close enough so my bare feet would be washed by the tip of the waves. The cool water felt wonderful, like a magic balm. One of my science teachers told me that the scientists believe that all life came from the ocean, and that's why we're all fascinated by it, drawn to it. Somehow the sound of the surf and the feel of the spray on my face and the sharp smell of the salt air in my nostrils and the freshness of its filling my lungs was comforting. 1,000 sympathy cards, 1,000 mourners in church, dozens of sermons, and hours of organ music couldn't bring any more consolation than the cry of the terns and the sight of the seemingly endless blue water. It reviewed me and gave me strength. It revived me and gave me strength to do battle with my own sadness. The funeral was 2 days later. The church service for Mommy's funeral was long and very impersonal. Of course, the casket was closed. The minister barely mentioned her name. Because she was a member of the Logan family, the church was filled to capacity. Grandma Olivia, regal as ever, ran the service with the nod of her head and the turn of her eyes and lifting of her hand. Cars were drawn up instantly, and the procession moved on to the cemetery. There, beside Grandma Olivia's father and mother, my mother's remains were laid. The minister said his words and pressed my hands. I was in a fog most of the time, but I turned away from the grave and saw Kenneth Childs off to the side watching. He wore a dark blue sports jacket and a pair of slacks. He actually looked rather handsome. His father, the judge, had been at Grandma Olivia's side throughout the funeral. Carrie was surprised as I was to see Kenneth attending, even if he did stand apart from all the party of the mourners. He left before I could say anything to him. I went back to school following that Monday to take my finals. All my teachers were sympathetic, but I asked for no special treatment. Carrie worked hard to prepare for his exams as well. The day after they ended, Carrie, Aunt Sarah, May, and even Uncle Jacob surprised me at breakfast. It was my birthday. I had vaguely thought about it, but between studying and taking exams and all the tragedy of the event, it didn't have any meaning or joy for me. Somehow they remembered, and there were presents waiting at the breakfast table. I opened May's first. It was a tape recorder. She explained how she picked it out herself and paid for it with her own money. She said that she wanted me to tape myself fiddling and singing. I thought it was amazing that someone so young would think so selflessly of those around her. She was truly like a little angel. I kissed and hugged her. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jacob had bought me 2 gifts. One was a gold dress watch, and the other was a pretty white cotton sundress with pastel embroidery on the trim. The hem was at least 5 inches above the knee. I was quite surprised, but Aunt Sarah explained that she asked the shop owner for something fashionable and then had convinced Uncle Jacob that it was proper and nice and something Laura would have loved. Carrie whispered that he had my gift on the sailboat. Taking you sailing today is my first gift, he explained. After breakfast, that's exactly where we went. He made it all look easy, and in minutes we were riding the waves, both of us screaming at the spray and laughing at the fish we saw jumping out of the water. When we settled into a calm for a few moments, he handed me a small gift-wrapped box. I opened it to find an ID bracelet. On each side of the inscription, Melanie was a musical note. Look at the back, he said. I turned it over. May there always be wind in your sails. Love, Carrie. This is beautiful, Carrie. Thank you, I said, and leaned over and gave him a kiss on his cheek. But just as I did, he smiled. Happy birthday, Melanie, he said. I sat back and put my ID bracelet, and we continued our wonderful sail. As we walked up from the beach later in the afternoon, I saw Carrie squint and I heard him say, I'll be damned. I gazed toward the house. What? Kenneth Child's Jeep is in our driveway, he said. We glanced at each other and quickened our pace. When we reached the house, we hurried inside to find Kenneth sitting in the living room with Uncle Jacob and Aunt Sarah. Well now, how was sailing? Uncle Jacob asked quickly. It was good, Dad, Carrie said. We both looked at Kenneth, who sat with his legs crossed. He wore a brown safari jacket with khaki pants and sneakers. No socks. Well, you two know Kenneth Childs, apparently. You visited him, I discover? Aye, Carrie said. He nodded at Kenneth, who was concentrating on me. My heart was thumping. Hello, I said. I didn't know today was your birthday, he said. Happy birthday. Thank you. Kenneth has come with a proposal. Seems you told him that you aren't doing much this summer, Melanie. I had plans, but they changed. Kenneth didn't smile. Instead, his eyes darkened. I've decided I need an assistant, he said, to help with the slave work. Do odd jobs around the house and the studio, take Ulysses for walks, he added with a smile. Naturally, I'd like someone who has an appreciation for art and understands a little about my needs. Oh, I said. I glanced at Uncle Jacob, who was very satisfied with himself. It's a trip to get out to my place, I know, but I get up very early in the morning to do my shopping. Beat the tourists, he added, looking at Uncle Jacob, who nodded. I could swing by and pick you up. Of course, I would see to it that you were brought home. Well, Uncle Jacob said, I guess. I looked at Carrie, who looked even more amazed than I felt. Sure, I said, I'd like that. Okay, Jacob, I have settled on a salary we both feel is fair, Kenneth said. I think you should discuss that with me, I blurted. Uncle Jacob lost his self-satisfied expression and Kenneth smiled. Absolutely. I was thinking of 100 a week. And food, of course, he said. Is that fair? Yes, it is. I was not really knowing if it was or not, but happy I'd taken control of my life. Then it's settled. You can start right after the last day of school. Oh, he said, standing, you can bring your fiddle along. Ulysses likes music. He started out, Uncle Jacob following. Carrie and I gazed at each other with surprise, and I looked at Aunt Sarah, who seemed confused as she stared at me. It was as if she'd discovered that I wasn't the person she thought I was. It gave me a chill. I tried smiling at her. She smiled back, and then I offered to help her with dinner, but it was to be a special dinner because of my birthday. She wanted to do it all herself. We had lobster and shrimp, wonderful home fries mixed with vegetables, Portuguese bread, and chocolate birthday cake. May helped blow out the candles and sang along with everyone else. I thanked them all. Even Uncle Jacob looked calmer and softer. How complex and confused all the people in my life now had become, I thought. Carrie pleaded with me to play the fiddle, and finally I gave in. I brought it down and played for them. Afterwards, I went outside to walk with Carrie. The stars above blazed, barely a wisp of a cloud to block their majestic beauty. Why do you think Kenneth has done this? I asked him. It's probably the easiest way he knows to get to know you and eventually tell the truth, Carrie said. I'll come by as much as I can to see if everything's all right. You don't have to worry so much about me. Of course I do, he said. I see you wore Laura's scarf tonight. That's nice. Somehow, because of all that's happened, I feel closer to her than ever, I said. He smiled softly and reached for my hand. Then he turned me toward the ocean, and we stood there listening to the surf. In the roar, both of us heard voices, his different from mine, of course. And then we walked back to the house under a downpour of starlight. Epilogue. Who am I? The auditorium was filled to capacity. People even stood in the rear. Mrs. Topper said it was the biggest variety show she'd ever had. I knew that many people had come to hear me play. The principal, Mr. Webster, revealed that when he came around to wish us all good luck. I knew a fiddle would attract interest, he said, but I understood many people hadn't come to hear my music so much as to see Olivia Logan's new granddaughter. Everyone in the family attended, even Uncle Jacob. None of the students, except for the ones who had been in our rehearsal, ever heard me play. Some of the girls came to laugh. I know the three witches of Macbeth had. They found themselves in the front row seats. Behind them sat Adam Jackson with his friends and girlfriends surrounding him, all woven together with giggles of ridicule. Most of the other students in the show sang and played a guitar. One student played the Carnival of Venice on the trumpet. It was a performance that brought the house down. Two girls performed the part of the scene from The Taming of the Shrew, and a boy juggled eggs. When one splattered at his feet, the audience roared and cheered. He was embarrassed, but he continued to do his act until they stopped laughing and applauded. After so much talent, I felt even more nervous. When it came to my performance, I waited in the wings while Mrs. Topper introduced me as the newest student. There was polite applause, and when I walked out onto the stage, I could feel all the eyes on my every movement. I was wearing the new dress Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jacob had bought for me. I also wore my identification bracelet, as well as what had once been Laura's charm bracelet. I didn't know what made me want to do this after so much sadness. I could have easily been excused, but I felt Papa George especially would have been proud to see me on stage. My fingers trembled so badly when I started, however, that I hit a sour note. Those waiting for me to fail roared and clapped. I stopped, took a deep breath, and looked beyond the audience. I looked back through time and saw Papa George on his patio, his pipe in his mouth, and I saw Grandma Arlene sitting on the lounge, and then I heard Daddy shout, "Wait for me." I turned on the stage as if he were running from our trailer to Papa George and Grandma Arlene. And when he sat down, I lifted the bow. The audience grew quiet, and I began to play Beautiful Dreamer and closed my eyes to sing. When I did, I saw my daddy's smiling face. He had loved me so much. Perhaps he never told me the truth because he'd come to believe I really was his daughter. Or perhaps he didn't want me to ever lose my love for him. I could never love him less. The music and my singing continued. Papa George was smiling, and Grandma Arlene beamed. Somewhere behind me, Mommy was chattering, complaining that we hadn't waited for her. Daddy told her to stop chewing on her lip and hurry over. I was about to begin another one. She joined him, and for a moment, we were a family again, untouched by lies and deceit, without jealousy and fears. Our smiles glowed. Love was in our eyes, and I wished that this moment could go on forever. I played harder to keep it so. I was singing too. My voice had never been as strong, never so filled with hope. I was so into my own performance. I had nearly finished before I realized the entire audience had joined with me. even the students that come to mock me. Carrie was beaming. Aunt Sarah was smiling broadly, and Uncle Jacob was nodding as if he is seeing something special. Even May, who had experienced so much less, clapped and shouted my name. Grandma Olivia looked pensive, and Grandpa Samuel was shaking his head and laughing. Way in the rear, I thought I saw Kenneth Childs standing by the door. Before the deafening applause ended, he disappeared. But he would be there that first morning as he promised. I waited for him. The morning sun wasn't very old or high, and the air was still quite cool. Carrie already went to the boat with Uncle Jacob. May was still asleep, and Aunt Sarah was cleaning up after breakfast, humming to herself, pausing occasionally as if she heard Laura's voice, and then nodding and smiling, and going on as usual. His jeep made the turn toward the house. A long time ago, perhaps, my mother waited like this for him. That was before the great lies began, and like a monster took over our lives for a long time. This was the beginning of the end of that, I thought. This was the beginning of the truth. Lies had brought me here, but I would stomp them out. There was no reason for all this then. Kenneth Childs knew it too. He was coming to get me because in his heart he had seen and heard that similar voice. The voice, he said, tell her, let her know who she is.